In the summer of 2017, a pair of hydrologists mapping an unmapped drainage tributary in the eastern reaches of the Grand Canyon region stumbled into a side canyon so narrow, so remote, that their GPS units showed it as blank terrain. No trail, no designation, no record of prior survey. They had to turn sideways to squeeze through the entrance. What they found inside stopped the work entirely. Scattered across a half-mile stretch of canyon floor, tucked into natural alcoves in the sandstone walls, and in several cases deliberately arranged beneath overhanging rock shelves, were the remains of 25 individuals. Not scattered bones, not isolated fragments. Remains, some still partially articulated, some accompanied by objects that had no business being in a place this far from any known settlement, this deep inside terrain that modern experienced hikers struggle to navigate. The hydrologists photographed everything on their phones, backed out of the canyon, and drove 4 hours to the nearest university. The physical anthropologist who answered that call described the moment she reviewed those photos as one of the most disorienting experiences of her professional life. Over the next 2 field seasons, a multidisciplinary team would catalog 25 sets of remains and the objects surrounding them, and what they found will force you to completely reconsider who was moving through this landscape, how far they traveled, and what they understood about the world. Some of what follows has been shared in conference presentations. Some of it has been deliberately withheld pending repatriation discussions. All of it is real. Subscribe right now, because number 1 on this list is something the lead researcher described as the most intellectually humbling thing she has ever encountered in 30 years of fieldwork. Number 25 is where the team began, and where the first uncomfortable questions emerged. The outermost remains in the canyon, closest to the narrow entrance, were those of an adult male estimated to be between 50 and 60 years of age at time of death. Stature reconstruction from the long bones placed him between 5 feet 11 inches and 6 feet 1 inch tall, which is notably above average for any pre-Columbian population group indigenous to the Southwest. His remains were accompanied by a single object, a walking staff or large cane, so badly degraded that only the mineralized impression of it remained in the canyon floor, along with the iron oxide stain where it had lain for centuries. The staff impression measured just over 6 feet in length. Whoever this person was, they were tall, they were mobile, and they had traveled with a single deliberate implement. The isotopic analysis of his tooth enamel, which records the geochemistry of the water a person drinks during childhood and early adolescence, showed values consistent with an origin somewhere in the high plateau country far to the north, not with the canyon region itself. He had walked a long way to get here. He did not walk back out. Number 24 was a set of remains that created immediate debate about the site's nature. The second individual cataloged was a woman, estimated between 30 and 40 years of age, whose remains showed evidence of significant physical labor over a sustained period, including bone remodeling at the shoulder, consistent with repeated overhead lifting and compression fractures in the lumbar vertebrae, consistent with carrying heavy loads. She was not buried in any conventional sense. She was seated, positioned deliberately against the canyon wall with her back to the rock and her face oriented toward the canyon entrance, and her hands had been placed in her lap. Whether she was arranged this way by others after death, or whether she died in this position, was impossible to determine from the physical evidence alone. Next to her left hand was a small ceramic bowl containing carbonized plant material that has been identified as a mixture of corn pollen, dried juniper berries, and a third substance that the botanists have not yet matched to any documented species. Number 23 was the first child found in the canyon, and the team's mood shifted when they documented it. The remains were those of a juvenile estimated at 8 to 12 years of age, sex undetermined from skeletal morphology alone. The child had been placed in a shallow depression in the canyon floor that appeared to have been scooped or scraped by hand, a depression that fit the body almost exactly. Over the remains, someone had arranged flat sandstone pieces in a layered pattern, creating a low covering that had protected the underlying remains from above for centuries. Beneath that covering, resting against the child's ribcage, was a small carved wooden figure, the only wooden object at the site to survive in any recognizable form, preserved by the extreme aridity of the canyon microclimate. The figure depicted a bird, Probably an eagle based on the hooked bill and wing spread, carved with a level of detail and craft that speaks to genuine artistic tradition. The wood has been identified as cottonwood, which is locally available, but the carving style matches nothing in the documented material culture of any known southwestern prehistoric group. Number 22 was the first set of remains that suggested the group may not have all died at once. The physical anthropology team found clear differences in the degree of weathering and surface modification across the skeletal elements of the 22nd individual compared to those of individuals 23 through 25. In plain terms, this person appears to have died and been placed here noticeably earlier than the others, possibly decades earlier. The bones showed greater sun bleaching and more advanced surface erosion than their neighbors. This individual, an adult of indeterminate sex, had been positioned in an alcove about 6 feet above the canyon floor, a placement that would have required assistance, and that suggests whoever placed them there was not in a hurry, was not under immediate threat, and had the time and the people to do things deliberately. A handful of small turquoise beads was found scattered beneath the alcove, their original arrangement lost to gravity and time. Number 21 introduced the first major anomaly in the material record. The remains of a second adult male, estimated between 40 and 50 years of age, were accompanied by a hafted stone tool of a type the lithic specialist on the team had never encountered outside of museum collections from a completely different region. The point was made from a distinctive cream-colored chert that trace element analysis matched to quarries in what is now the Texas Panhandle, roughly 500 miles to the east. The hafting technique, the specific method by which the stone point was attached to its wooden handle using plant fiber cordage and pine pitch, matched descriptions in the literature of tool technology associated with the Caddo cultural tradition, an agricultural society centered in the Arkansas and Red River basins. What a Caddo tradition tool was doing in a sealed canyon in the Grand Canyon region, in the company of a man whose stature and isotopic signature suggest origins far to the north, is a question the team has not resolved. Number 20 was a set of remains that the physical anthropologist described in her field notes simply as unusual, and then took 2 full pages to explain why. The individual was female, estimated at 20 to 30 years of age, with a skeletal morphology that differed measurably from any comparative population in the regional database. The differences were not dramatic, not the kind you'd notice on the street, but they were consistent across multiple skeletal elements in ways that statistical analysis flagged as meaningful. The skull showed features that the forensic anthropologist on the team, when pressed for an informal interpretation, described as consistent with populations from the Pacific Rim, a characterization she immediately and carefully qualified with every appropriate caveat about the limitations of skeletal morphology as a population indicator. Ancient DNA analysis has been requested. Results have not yet been released publicly. Number 19 marked a shift in what the team was finding alongside the remains. For the first 11 individuals, the accompanying objects had been relatively modest: ceramics, stone tools, personal ornaments. Number 19 changed that. This adult male, estimated between 35 and 45 years of age, was accompanied by what appeared to be the remnants of a substantial textile, badly degraded, but preserving enough fiber structure for analysis. The fibers were cotton, not wild cotton. Cultivated, processed, spun, and woven cotton, of a thread count and weave consistency that indicates sophisticated textile production. Cotton cultivation in the prehistoric Southwest is documented, but the fiber characteristics of this textile, specifically the staple length and the twist direction of the spun thread, are more consistent with cotton working traditions from Mesoamerica than with known ancestral Puebloan textile production. Someone had either carried a finished textile a very long way, or had learned to work cotton in a very specific way that traces back to somewhere far to the south. Leave a comment right now and tell me what you think is happening here. Was this a trading post, a pilgrimage site, or something we don't have a name for yet? Number 18 was a woman estimated between 50 and 65 years of age, the oldest individual in the canyon, whose remains showed a lifetime of the kind of physical wear associated with sustained walking over rough terrain. The wear patterns on her joints, particularly the knees and the balls of her feet, told a story of someone who had spent decades covering long distances. Her teeth showed dental modification, intentional reshaping of the upper incisors, a practice documented in several Mesoamerican cultures and also, more locally, in certain Hohokam communities of the Sonoran Desert. She carried nothing with her that survived. No ceramic, no stone, no fiber. She carried only herself, an old woman who had walked farther than almost anyone around her, and who had apparently been placed at the center of the canyon space with some intentionality, given that her remains occupied a natural alcove at roughly the midpoint of the site. Number 17 was the first set of remains associated with clear evidence of ritual fire. A shallow basin in the sandstone floor adjacent to the 17th individual showed the unmistakable black staining and heat fracturing of repeated controlled burning. The charcoal from that basin, carefully collected and dated, returned ages spanning roughly 150 years, suggesting the fire was lit, extinguished, and relit many times over multiple generations. The individual associated with this basin, a male estimated between 30 and 40 years of age, showed no evidence of burning on the bones themselves, ruling out cremation. He was simply near the fire basin, as if the fire had been kept burning in his company rather than applied to him. In the ash layer immediately above the oldest charcoal date, the team found 3 small objects, 2 fragments of shell that came from the Pacific coast, and a single bead made from a bright blue mineral that has been identified as azurite, which occurs naturally in copper-bearing rock formations, and was used as a pigment and ornamental material across a wide range of ancient cultures on multiple continents. Number 16 introduced the first large-format object at the site. Leaning against the canyon wall behind the 16th individual, an adult female of estimated age between 25 and 35, was a sandstone slab roughly 2 feet by 3 feet and about 4 inches thick. Its surface had been carefully smoothed and then incised with a dense pattern of symbols arranged in rows. The slab was not locally derived. The sandstone type and the specific mineral banding of the rock matched a formation that the geologist on the team traced to a source approximately 90 miles to the northeast, which means it was carried here deliberately, at considerable effort. The symbols on its surface have been analyzed by 5 specialists in pre-Columbian iconography and rock art. 3 of them identified partial matches to the Hopi symbol system. 1 identified partial matches to symbols found in the Valley of Mexico. 1 declined to make any identification, and submitted a formal note to the project record stating that the symbol set did not match any documented tradition she was aware of. None of them agreed with each other. All of them agreed that the symbols were deliberate, systematic, and not decorative. Number 15 added a new category of evidence to the site. The remains of a juvenile, estimated at 14 to 16 years of age, were accompanied by the partial skeleton of a large bird, specifically a golden eagle, whose bones had been deliberately defleshed and arranged alongside the human remains in a specific orientation. Wing bones extended on either side, as if the bird had been posed in flight. Eagle remains in funerary contexts are documented across many southwestern and plains traditions, but the specific arrangement here, the pairing with a juvenile rather than an elder, and the presence of copper bells, 3 small bells made from hammered copper sheet, attached to the eagle's leg bones by fiber ties, spoke to a ritual tradition the team could not find a close parallel for in the existing literature. The bells themselves are of the type called Casas Grandes bells, associated with the Paquime culture of northwestern Chihuahua, Mexico. Finding them attached to a deliberately arranged eagle skeleton in a remote Arizona canyon alongside a teenager is the kind of detail that keeps archaeologists awake at night. Number 14 was the first set of remains that yielded direct evidence of deliberate mummification. In the extreme aridity of the canyon, natural desiccation had preserved organic material throughout the site. But this individual, a male estimated between 40 and 50 years of age, showed evidence of treatment that went beyond what the environment alone could produce. The skin and soft tissue preservation was markedly better than adjacent remains, and the body had been wrapped in multiple layers of plant fiber matting that had been saturated with a resinous substance before being applied, a substance that chemical analysis identified as a mixture of pine resin and a plant-based oil consistent with those derived from desert shrubs. Deliberate mummification in the ancient Southwest is documented most prominently in certain basket maker and ancestral Puebloan contexts. But the specific technique here, the resin-saturated wrapping, is described in ethnographic and archaeological literature from coastal Peru and from ancient Egypt, and is not part of any documented North American tradition. This does not mean it could not have been independently developed, but it is another detail that the team was not prepared for. Number 13 was a set of remains accompanied by the most significant single object found outside of the top 3 on this list. The individual was female, estimated between 30 and 45 years of age, and she was lying on her back with her arms extended at her sides, which the team flagged as a distinct departure from the seated or flexed positions of the other individuals at the site. Resting on her chest, positioned as if placed there intentionally after death, was a ceramic vessel unlike anything else at the site. The vessel was about 10 inches tall, made from a fine-tempered buff clay, and painted in black and white geometric designs on a red slip ground. The form and the painting style were immediately recognizable to the ceramic specialist on the team as consistent with Salado polychrome, a distinctive ceramic tradition associated with the Salado cultural phenomenon that flourished in the Tonto Basin and surrounding areas of Arizona between roughly 1275 and 1450 CE. This was not exotic or mysterious in terms of origin. What was unexpected was its condition. The vessel was intact, unbroken, still sealed. When it was opened under laboratory conditions, it contained a dark liquid that has retained enough organic chemistry after centuries for partial analysis. It is almost certainly a fermented beverage of some kind. Someone sealed a drink inside this vessel, placed it on a dead woman's chest, and expected it to be there when she needed it. Subscribe right now if you haven't already, because what we find in the next 12 individuals gets stranger from here. Number 12 brought the team into a section of the canyon that narrowed further, before opening into a small natural chamber about 20 feet across. The remains here were grouped more closely together than elsewhere at the site, and the 12th individual, a male estimated between 25 and 35 years of age, occupied the approximate center of this chamber. He had been placed in a seated position facing the canyon entrance, identical to the woman described at number 24, and his hands had been arranged in a specific gesture, the right hand open and palm up, the left hand closed. This gesture, or something close to it, appears in codex imagery from several Mesoamerican traditions to indicate speech, address, or formal presentation. Whether it was consciously intended to convey that meaning here, or whether the similarity is coincidental, no one can say. What the team could say is that he appeared to have been the last person placed in this chamber, based on the stratigraphy of the floor deposits around his remains. Number 11 raised a question that the team had been successfully avoiding until this point, which is the question of violence. The 11th individual, a male of estimated age between 20 and 30, showed clear evidence of perimortem trauma, meaning injuries sustained around the time of death. 2 of his ribs showed healed fractures from an earlier episode, consistent with a significant blow to the torso at some point years before death. His right forearm showed a perifracture, the kind of break that happens when you raise your arm to block a blow, and the back of his skull showed depression fractures consistent with blunt force from behind. He had been in a fight before, survived it, and then been killed, probably from behind, before being placed here with as much care as everyone else. His hands had been arranged as deliberately as his neighbors. Whatever had happened to him, whoever had done it, he was still part of this group. He still belonged here. Number 10 was the first remains found in an elevated position. A narrow ledge about 12 feet above the canyon floor, reachable only by climbing, held the carefully placed remains of a woman estimated between 40 and 55 years of age. Getting her body up there would have required at least 2 strong people, probably more. The physical effort of that placement was a statement about her importance to whoever did it. She had with her a bundle of items wrapped in decayed textile, and within that bundle the team found, among other things, a fragment of worked shell from a species found only in the warm waters of the Gulf of California, a small carved stone pendant in the shape of a hand with fingers together, and a length of human hair, braided with fiber cordage, that DNA analysis suggests came from a different individual than the woman herself. an individual whose genetic profile places their closest modern relatives not in the Southwest, but in the Pacific Northwest coast region. Number 9 was a set of remains that demonstrated something about the group's medical knowledge that the team found difficult to categorize. The individual was a male estimated between 35 and 50 years of age, who showed clear evidence of having survived a serious leg fracture years before his death. The fracture had healed cleanly and completely, with no signs of septic bone infection, and the alignment was nearly perfect, meaning whoever had set this fracture had done it skillfully. Clean healing of a complex long bone fracture requires immobilization, which requires splinting material and binding, and it requires the patient to remain stationary during healing, which in a highly mobile group means someone else was providing food and care. This individual had been injured severely enough that he should have died or been left behind, and instead he was healed by people with skill and kept alive by people with commitment. And he eventually made it here, to this canyon, where he was placed with the same care as everyone else. Number 8 introduced the site's most complex arrangement. 3 individuals, numbers 8, 7, and 6, were found positioned in a rough triangle around a central flat stone that the team came to call the table stone, though that is an interpretive label rather than a formal designation. The table stone was a roughly circular piece of sandstone about 3 feet in diameter, smoothed on its upper surface, with a series of small cup-shaped depressions ground into it in a pattern. Astronomers consulted by the team have suggested that the cup pattern matches the positions of major stars in the constellation Scorpius, as they appear from this latitude around the summer solstice. The 3 individuals surrounding this stone, 2 males and 1 female of varying ages, had all been positioned with their faces oriented toward the stone rather than toward the canyon entrance, a distinct departure from the pattern established by others at the site. Whatever was on or around that stone when they were placed here has not survived. Number 7 was the older of the 2 males in the triangle arrangement, estimated between 55 and 70 years of age, making him among the oldest individuals at the site. His remains showed lifelong skeletal changes associated with extensive kneeling, specifically deep squatting facets on the ankle and knee joints, a finding common in populations that spend significant time in ground-level work or ceremony. He wore, still around his neck at the time of discovery, a necklace of alternating shell and stone beads that had largely kept its structure due to mineralization of the original fiber cord. The stone beads in that necklace were made from 5 different materials, each from a different geological source, 1 matching Arizona, 1 matching Utah, 1 matching Nevada, 1 matching New Mexico, and 1 matching a source in Sonora, Mexico. This was not an object assembled from whatever was nearby. This was an object that had absorbed bead by bead the geography of an enormous range. Comment right now and tell me what you think this place was. I want to hear your theory. Number 6. The 3rd member of the triangle group was a female estimated between 30 and 45 years of age, whose remains were in the best overall condition of any at the site. Her preservation was partly a function of the specific alcove in which she was placed, which had exceptional airflow and dryness, and partly, it appears, because she had been wrapped more thoroughly than anyone else at the site. The wrapping materials were almost entirely gone, but their impression remained in the consolidated sediment around her remains, and the pattern of that impression indicates she had been wrapped in at least 6 separate layers of material of varying textures. Within those layers, pressed directly against the skin of her left forearm, was a small flat piece of worked bone, about 3 inches long, incised with parallel lines that the team counted and recounted because the number kept coming up the same. There are 365 of them, within a tolerance of 1, accounting for damage at one edge, the incised lines on that bone number 365. Number 5 was the first individual found in what appeared to be a deliberate paired arrangement. 2 sets of remains, numbers 5 and 4, had been placed side by side with their bodies oriented identically and their hands touching. The 5th individual was a male estimated between 20 and 30 years of age, who showed, remarkably, evidence of a healed surgical procedure on his skull. A roughly circular section of bone approximately 1 inch in diameter had been removed from the top of his skull using a technique called trepanation, and the margins of that opening showed complete healing, meaning he had survived the procedure by years, possibly decades. Trepanation in the ancient Americas is documented in Peru, in Mesoamerica, and in scattered North American contexts, but it is rare in the Southwest and essentially unattested in the Grand Canyon region. That this man survived it, traveled here, and was placed in a paired arrangement suggesting a deep relationship with the individual beside him suggests a life story of considerable complexity and significance. Number 4 was the second member of the pair, a female estimated between 25 and 35 years of age, whose remains showed no unusual trauma or pathology, but whose accompanying objects included the most geographically distant material found at the site up to this point. Next to her right hand was a small ceramic figurine, about 5 inches tall, depicting a seated human figure with elaborate headdress and facial ornamentation. The figure was made from a fine orange-ware clay that does not occur naturally anywhere in the American Southwest. Its closest compositional match is to clay sources in the Valley of Mexico, specifically the region around Teotihuacan. The figurine style is not Teotihuacan, not exactly, but it shares enough formal elements with classic period Central Mexican figurine traditions that the ceramics specialist submitted a formal notation to the site record, stating that she could not rule out a Central Mexican origin for either the object or the knowledge of how to make it. This couple, if that is what they were, had between them evidence of a world that extended from somewhere in the ancient Southwest to the heart of Mesoamerica. Number 3 was a set of remains whose discovery forced a reassessment of the entire site. The third individual was found not on the canyon floor or in an alcove, but beneath it. During the excavation of a sediment layer that had been disturbed by ancient rodent burrowing, the team uncovered a prepared pit, roughly rectangular, lined on all 4 sides and on the bottom with flat stone slabs that had been fitted together with deliberate care. Inside that pit, wrapped in the now familiar mineralized impression of textile layering, were the most completely preserved skeletal remains at the site. The individual was male, estimated between 45 and 60 years of age, and his remains were accompanied by a quantity of objects that dwarfed any other single assemblage at the site. Among them was a mosaic of turquoise and shell, partially intact, that would originally have covered a surface of approximately 2 square feet. The kind of mosaic work associated with the highest levels of prestige and ceremonial manufacture in several Mesoamerican and Southwestern traditions. There was also a carved wooden staff fragment with traces of pigment, 2 intact ceramic vessels of different traditions that appeared to have been intentionally placed in dialogue with each other, and a bundle of what have been identified as tobacco leaves, partially carbonized. This was a burial of someone important, someone for whom others had gathered objects from a very wide world, someone who had been placed underground with more ceremony and more care than anyone else here, and then hidden beneath the canyon floor. Number 2 was the last individual documented before the team reached the discovery that the lead researcher has described as the most significant thing she has encountered in her career. The second individual was a woman estimated between 60 and 80 years of age, by far the oldest person at the site. Her remains were positioned at the very back of the inner chamber, in the deepest, most protected point of the entire canyon. She was lying on her back with her arms crossed over her chest, and she was surrounded, in a ring around her entire body, by objects placed with unmistakable intentionality. There were ceramic vessels from at least 4 distinct traditions, stone tools from 3 different geological sources, shell from 2 different coasts, copper ornaments, woven fiber fragments, carved bone, mineral pigments in small stone cups, and a bundle of feathers, mostly macaw, that have been radiocarbon dated to the earliest occupation of the site. She was at the center of everything. The ring of objects around her was not random accumulation. It was a structured statement made by many hands over, possibly a long period of time. She was the reason this place existed, or she was the person left to watch over it after everyone else was gone. Nobody on the team has been willing to say definitively which. And now we reach number 1. This is the object, and the individual that caused the lead physical anthropologist to stop her field documentation mid-sentence, set down her clipboard, and stand in silence for what her colleagues reported as a very long time. The first individual was found not in an alcove, not in a pit, not on the canyon floor, but in a crevice in the canyon wall at approximately shoulder height. A space so narrow that the remains could only have been placed there by someone working with extraordinary care and patience. The individual was a male, estimated age between 30 and 50, whose skeletal remains were the least complete at the site due to the geometry of the crevice. But what was found with him was complete. On a small natural sandstone shelf within the crevice, placed at the level of his head, was a collection of objects that the team spent 3 field days documenting. There was a painted ceramic disc, about 8 inches in diameter, covered on one face with a cosmological diagram depicting the sun, the moon, 4 cardinal directions, and what appeared to be the paths of 3 celestial bodies across the sky, rendered with a precision that the astronomer on the team described as consistent with detailed naked-eye observation over many years. There was a small bundle of plant material that has been identified as peyote, a psychoactive cactus used ceremonially across a wide range of indigenous traditions. There were 5 small figurines made from different materials, each one representing a different animal, and each one, the zoologist confirmed, depicting an animal from a different ecological zone: a fish, a jaguar, an eagle, a bison, and a creature that took 3 consultations to identify as a sea turtle. 5 animals from 5 different worlds: the river, the jungle, the sky, the plains, and the open ocean, gathered in the hand of a man in a crevice in a canyon that is not on any map. But what stopped the lead researcher, what made her set down her clipboard and stand in silence, was the last item. Pressed against the wall at the back of the crevice behind all of it was a piece of hide, about the size of a large book, that had been treated to survive, and that had, to a remarkable degree, survived. On it, painted in red ochre in lines so fine and so controlled that the researcher initially thought she was looking at printed text, was writing. Not symbols, not pictographs, not iconographic notation. Writing, in the structural sense, with a consistent grammar of repeated units, combinations, and apparent syntax that the 3 linguists who have since examined it all agree represents a fully developed writing system. It does not match any known writing system in the world. It does not match the symbols from the slab at number 16 or the tablet from the Mississippi River. It is, as far as anyone has been able to determine, something entirely its own. It has not been deciphered. The linguists working on it have been at it for 4 years. They do not expect to finish soon. The man in the crevice was not a wanderer who stumbled into this canyon. He was the last one in, or the one who chose to stay, or the one who was placed there to hold the door between what this group knew and whatever came after. And what he left on that piece of hide may be the most important document no one has ever read. Here is what this canyon tells us, if we are willing to hear it. 25 people from multiple places, carrying objects from the Georgia mountains and the Texas panhandle and the Pacific coast and the Gulf of Mexico, and quite possibly the heart of ancient Mexico, found their way into a crack in the earth too narrow to notice and chose it as the place where they, or their dead, would stay. They were not simple. They were not isolated. They were not the people the old textbooks described as scattered and primitive and unconnected. They knew things. They had traveled. They had trade networks and medical knowledge and astronomical records and a writing system that 4 years of professional effort has not yet cracked. The next time someone tells you that the ancient Americas were a patchwork of isolated bands with no large-scale connection to the wider world, ask them about the mummified man in the canyon crevice who died holding figurines of a jaguar, an eagle, a bison, a fish, and a sea turtle, and left behind a document that no one alive today can read. Drop a comment right now and tell me which of these 25 individuals you think was the most important and why. The discussion in these comments is one of the best things about making this channel, and I want to hear what you think. Subscribe if you haven't already, share this with someone who thinks they know the full story of American history, and I will see you in the next one.